contributor, author of Trump's Triumph, and a great friend and mentor. Newt, welcome back. Trump's Triumph, it's really pretty remarkable. But I think you and I agree there's more to be done. The Iranian story is obliterating the nuclear weapons, as best we know. But, you know, they still haven't taken back death to Israel or death to America. It's still a police state, isn't it? It still doesn't have any rights for its citizenry. I mean, there's more work to be done. I'm not sure how to do it. Maybe you can help us. But I hate to rule out regime change in some form or another. What you thinking about that, Newt?
Well, I thought the most interesting comment, well, President Trump says flatly he doesn't want to have regime change. He also said in a tweet the other day that making Iran great again, which is a slightly different variation on MAGA, that ought to be one of our goals. And while he's against us going in to change the regime, if the people of Iran want to change the regime so that they can again have a decent future, he would understand that. Look, I think none of us understand what the agreement's going to be. Are we going to have full inspection rights without any kind of impediment? Are they going to concede no nuclear weapons and no strategic missiles? Are they going to concede no funding for terrorism? I mean, there's a long way from where we are right now to a sustainable future in the Middle East. And the record of this theocratic dictatorship has been very, very bad. Since 1979, they've consistently said death to America and death to Israel. As recently as a couple of months ago, the Ayatollah Khomeini went on national television and said, I want to reassure the Iranian people that death to America is not a slogan, it is a policy. Well, are they prepared to give up all that, which is really their identity? And if they can, will they split into a hardline faction that wants desperately to continue down the road that the original Ayatollah Khomeini began in 1979? We just don't know. And I think it's important to see how the next week or 2 weeks play out and whether or not, in fact, what President Trump has said all along, no nuclear weapons in Iran. Can we really believe that will happen with this dictatorship? And is there a way to get an agreement so enforceable that we know we're not going to be cheated on? I think there's a lot out there. Personally, I also believe there's a great opportunity for all of the remarkably successful Iranian-American entrepreneurs to at some point create a bridge towards prosperity and a bridge towards an entrepreneurial future for the people of Iran without costing the American taxpayer a penny. And I do think in that sense, engaging successful Iranian Americans in the reconstruction of what will clearly be a pretty damaged country would be dramatically better than spending American tax dollars through some kind of bureaucracy.
Yes, well, we've talked a lot about the Persian diaspora. Actually, I talked about it with the son of the Shah. They're ready, able, and willing to refinance reconstruction of Iran if we get this Ayatollah police state out of the way. You know, just on the economic front, even though they're oil rich, what the mullahs have done to the Iranian economy in the last 4 decades is terrible. Just recently, okay, you look at the IMF numbers, they've got near 40% inflation. They do not have any economic growth whatsoever, zero growth. Their unemployment rate is near to 10%. I'm sure those numbers are all undercounted. They've wrecked that, despite the fact that they're oil rich. They're basically running a kind of socialist, statist economy apart from, and then there's the police state emphasis. And if there's negotiation, I would ask you, you've put your finger on it, when is it that these mullahs, if they continue in power, when are they going to say, all right, we will now acknowledge Israel, that we do not want to end the Israeli state? I mean, wouldn't that be a nice thing to see? Or wouldn't that be something that would go into a new negotiation? Or, let alone death to America. How about stopping the policy of death to Israel, for example?
Well, look, I think both from an Israeli perspective, where it's a matter of life and death, and from an American perspective, where if they ever do get nuclear weapons and strategic missiles, it'll become a matter of life and death. The next couple of weeks are important. Can we set down serious lines of demarcation of things they have to do to avoid having their government totally destroyed militarily? Or are we going to go back to the same dumb games that every president before Trump played, where we talk with the Iranians, they lie to us, we go along with the lie because, after all, we don't want to break the ceasefire. I mean, I am against having a ceasefire if it allows the Iranian dictatorship to continue to finance terrorism, continue to chant death to Israel and death to America, and secretly try to rebuild their nuclear capability. I really think we have gotten to a crossroads, but we haven't crossed through that crossroad yet. And I'm going to watch very carefully to see what these negotiations look like in the next 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah, well, I couldn't agree more with that. To go back and to restart. Now, they're out of business. You know, what our Patriot Air Force, Navy, what our military people have done to obliterate them is remarkable. Helped, of course, by the Israeli Air Force and so forth. It's terrific. So they're crippled. Maybe, you know, maybe for a couple years, but whether they're crippled forever, I don't know. I mean, I want all of this to work. So do you. So does everybody. Question is, you put your finger on it again, I think. What kind of diplomatic deal, what kind of negotiated deal is next up on the docket? That, you know, what's in there that would really ensure complete and utter change? The opportunity here is to have one big Abraham Accord. You know, think about that. And one big Abraham Accord would be one big prosperous trading, investment, allied with America zone. Middle East comes alive. That would be the optimal. Can we get there, Newt? Can we get there?
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, I don't know that the dictatorship has been weakened enough to get there. For example, if they would open up to American and other entrepreneurs to invest, if they would reduce their religious police, who was recently as 2 years ago beat a young woman to death for not having her hair covered properly, and then they hung 500 people in public because of the demonstrations that occurred after she had been killed. I mean, we need to understand how really bad this regime is and find out, are they really prepared to change? Because if they're not prepared to change, then this war failed. And I think it's very important to understand that we either had to break the regime or they have to agree to very dramatic changes, which in effect will repudiate the period since 1979. And I find it hard to think that they could do it. Apparently the president thinks it's possible. And I'm certainly inclined to always believe that President Trump has more information than I do and that he has reasons to believe this. I'd be very curious what the Iranians said in order to get this ceasefire and whether or not they will now follow through on what they said.
Interesting point. Well, President Trump's done a heck of a job, remarkable job so far. So let us hope, and let us watch it. Let us hope. Newt Gingrich, as always, thanks for your wisdom.